The Keeping It Sporty podcast, a podcast where we talk about everything sports. We get excited.
Take them down! Down! Yeah!
We get tense.
I might get kicked off this call for saying what I'm about to say, but we gotta trade vodka with me at this.
We ask the hard-hitting questions.
Do you think yoga could solve bigger problems in the world?
We also learn some life lessons along the way.
You keep grinding, you'll find your way. This is the way life works.
All with your host, me, Elias Drakos.
I've been your host, Elias Drakos. So long, and see you next time.
Join me, and let's embark on a new adventure on the Keeping It Sporty podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Keeping It Sporty podcast. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or by visiting our website at keepingitsporty.com. On today's episode, I am joined by a very special guest who is a senior director for Nike in Portland, Oregon. I welcome to the show Kevin Christiani. Kevin, how's it going?
Hi, Les. Things are going well. Thanks for having me on, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
No problem. It's my pleasure. So Kevin, you grew up in Toronto, obviously. I can tell you're wearing a Leafs hat right now. You attended Villanova University, and you now live in Portland, as I mentioned, where you're a senior director for Nike. So why don't you give me maybe a little bit of a background on how this all transpired?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Scarborough, and then inside of Scarborough, I grew up in what is referred to as Guildwood Village, down kind of by the beach there, and so I went to high school at Neil McNeil High School, and I was in terms of the sports that I played, which is kind of ends up being the reason why I ended up at Nike, is that I ran track, and I competed at track for Neil McNeil, and at OFSA and all the fun little meets that we would have, and then ended up getting a track scholarship to Villanova University down in just outside of Philadelphia. And so I was fortunate enough to go down there for 4 years. And prior to that, during my high school period, I had my high school coach. His name was Al Bajan, or is Al Bajan, and he had an affiliation with the group at Nike, where they were, he's a phys ed teacher, and they were a former runner, and still trying to compete. And him and another teacher at the school, they were sponsored arguably by Nike. And so they were getting product, and so they had relationships with the Nike folks. Fast forward to when I was leaving Villanova, I was trying to figure out, like everybody does when they're leaving college, is what am I going to do with my life? And at Villanova, I was an accounting major, and my options were really to stay and sit for the accounting exam in Pennsylvania, or go back home. And I wasn't really looking forward to staying in Pennsylvania. I kind of wanted to go home, and I was also going to try to run professionally, at least for a couple of years, to see what I could get out of that. And based off of the relationships, my high school coach and the relationships that I had with the folks at Nike, they were in the middle of moving their operations from Vancouver to Toronto, and they still have a distribution center in Scarborough, and they have an office in downtown Toronto. That's the Nike Canada headquarters that's the headquarters for Nike Canada. And in talking to those folks and them asking me, like, what are you going to do after school? And they were able to, along with at the time the director of operations at Nike Canada, give me an interview, and I really started in customer service, answering phones. From 12 p.m. To 9 p.m. Was my shift, and it allowed me to continue to run and try to do what I wanted to do, but also, earn some money at a company that I had always had a passion for and affiliated with, and really as a track person, for the folks that know the history of Nike. It started basically as a running company, as our founder was a runner at the University of Oregon, and it kind of took off from there. And so I've always kind of identified with this brand, whether it's through running or through other athletes that in my age, when I grew up, were just part of those historical, iconic Nike ads that we've all come to love, whether it was Just Do It or Bo Jackson or Michael Jordan, et cetera, down the list. I always had a passion for the company, and I ended up, interviewing for the job and getting it and doing, like I said, starting in customer service. And then as you kind of transition through different roles, so I started with Nike in 1997, and by 1999, they came to me and asked me that there were, or they told me there was an opportunity in Portland, Oregon, on a project that they thought I'd be good for, and I flew out here and interviewed for that, and got that, and I moved out here in 1999, and apart from being back in Canada for 2 years, I think it was back in 2013, 14-ish, I've been here in Portland, or based in Portland, since 1999, and I've been with Nike for 27 years now, and it's been a great run, and a really good company to work for, and it's done a lot for me, and it's always nice to turn something that's a passion into a real job, because you feel kind of more vested in what you're doing, because it's not just a job that you feel like you're punching in and punching out or having to drive to work every day. I've never really felt like working here or working at Nike has been a real job. So I've been very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, I was gonna say that that's quite the move that you made, obviously, from Toronto to Portland, kind of, I suppose, uprooting your whole life to move somewhere. But obviously, it's paid off from what you're saying. I mean, 27 years is a great amount of time to be working somewhere, and I mean, obviously, even after 27 years, you're still enjoying the job, which is terrific. Okay, so why don't we talk a little more about maybe where your love for sports comes from? I know you mentioned how you did track and field. Is there anything else that you maybe wanted to discuss about your love for sports growing up?
Sure. It maybe more in the US, I'm not sure. Well, I guess it can apply to Canada and hockey. It's like there seems to be this trend of kids really focusing early on a specific sport. And it's a lot of us, it's just how we end up maybe the way we are is not only due to the influence our parents have, but also where we grow up and the communities that we're part of. And we moved to where my parents still live in Scarborough when I was 4 years old. And I was I think I actually was the youngest kid on the street, but we had a diversity of age between, if I was 4, there were like 3 or 4 kids that were like 10. And then there was 8 kids that were probably like 12 or 13 at the time. And so they were older. But we grew up on a street or in a neighborhood where it was like my mom would be, it's like come home when the street lights come on type of stuff in the summer. And we, as a group of, maybe not everybody all the time, but we played every sport under the sun. And that's how I really kind of was introduced to all these sports. In some cases, my wife gives me a hard time as to why I'm like good at all these things. And it's just because we played all kinds of stuff. Like we played basketball, we played soccer, we played baseball. We used to play a game called burpee, which was you throw a ball, you're basically playing baseball, but with a tennis ball and a bat, and it's just 2 people. And there's a box drawn on the school wall, and that's how you determine whether there's a ball and strike. Whether it was volleyball or like whatever the sport du jour, we played a lot of road hockey, obviously, because that's what we do when we're Canadian, or at least in some communities. And just by playing all of those things and then translating that into elementary school and being part of like every team I could be part of, I played on every single, like as many teams as I could. I was even on the badminton team in elementary school just because we started playing it in PE, and I was like, this is cool. And I qualified for the school team and went on to play other schools. And it's just some of those things that you get exposed to in sport really drove the passion. And it was like, it gets to like the exercise aspect of it for, whether it's even now I'm more observant of it than ever, but just from a mental health perspective, is physical activity really does something for me. And if I don't do it, I'm not the same person, and I need to make sure that I'm carving out time to do it. And that's all really started from when I was 4 years old, growing up on Nuffield Drive in Scarborough, and it just kind of continued for me all the way through even to what I do today, because I'm still actively involved in a lot of sport.
Yeah, there's always been, I mean, a strong link between good mental health and, of course, playing sports. I mean, I feel it's great for everybody. So now going back to your job a little bit at Nike, what would you say is the thing you love most about working in that role? If you had to pinpoint maybe one thing or a few things that you love the most about it.
Yeah, and I think like for me, I've been lucky because I had a lot of what they call individual contributor roles, where it's like, okay, it's me doing my job, and then I report to a manager. But I became a leader of people relatively early in my career, probably within the first 5 years. And I'd say that that's probably the biggest thing for me is just leading people and trying to help them, early on for me, it was like help them develop their career at Nike, whether they want to stay there. There's a lot of employees that have been there like me for a long time because it is a culture that fosters that type of stuff. And I think it's important because it creates a culture at the company that I think is probably better than most companies. While it's changed from when I started in 27 years ago to now, it's definitely different. I will give it that. It's much more of a corporation now, but it still has some of its old kind of culture feels at certain points in time, and working with people and developing people and helping people just be better humans, and whether it's related to what they do in their job or related to what they do outside of work, and being a counsel for folks or a sounding board for whatever the issue is, has always been something that I think is really, I feel rewarded by, that I get to do on a somewhat daily basis. And then I'd say the frustrating part of the job is like, it's a publicly traded company, and we're trying to do the best that we can to for our shareholders, and sometimes that's can be frustrating. But the biggest thing for me is really how you work with people, whether it's the people that work for you or the people that you work with. There's just a lot of good people that share the same passion for sport, and share the same desire to win, which is part of the culture as well at Nike. So it's like a giant sports team that is tries to be all in it together in order to win whatever game you're playing, depending on the area of the business that you're part of. But I think for me, it always comes back to managing and developing people, and making their experience at the company the best that you can, regardless of what's going on around us from a business perspective.
So you had mentioned to me that you're a huge Toronto Maple Leaf fan, and I was wondering if you're also a huge Toronto Raptors fan as well.
From an NBA perspective, the Raptors are interesting. When I left when I left Toronto, it was right when the Raptors were starting, and I think they were like year 2. So I was never really like a Raptors fan. I was cheering for them obviously when they were making their run and won the championship, but I'm more of a Portland Trailblazers fan because I monitor them more locally, and who's on the team and all that kind of stuff. Those are and I'm still a Blue Jays fan, so because there's no baseball team out here, I'm not going to be a Mariners fan. But so I'm
Okay, good.
A little mix of Toronto teams and geographic teams, and based off of where I am.
Okay, well that's good you didn't say the Mariners. I'm glad about that because there's been some history between them and the Jays, of course. But
Yeah.
that's interesting, yeah. Because I was gonna say by the time you were leaving, the Raptors were just kind of developing, so that makes sense that you're a Trailblazers fan, of course. Okay, so going back just a little more about your role with Nike, you said it's a bit of an ever changing role, more or less. What I was wondering, what does a typical day in your life look like working for the company?
Yeah, so like function, like the company has multiple functions, right? And so if I was just to narrow in and help you and everyone understand the function I'm in the supply chains. I've been in the supply chain space for mostly of my 27 years at Nike. I've been in a planning role for the last I guess it would be 8 years at Nike, and I'll explain a little bit about what each of those is. But basically in supply chain, you're trying to move product from point A to point B, and that could be from a factory in whatever country of origin you're actually making the product, to a customer or to a Nike owned distribution center that sits somewhere in the globe. That's like one area of the supply chain. The other area of the supply chain is actually delivering it while you're inside the country from when it arrives at port to a customer or to a Nike distribution, and then from a distribution center out to wherever it needs to go. And so I've been involved in multiple roles in kind of that space. And then the third part of supply chain is actually the manufacturing side, which is where you're actually working in a factory or leading a factory group in whatever country of origin you were making product. And, they're the ones that are actually, making footwear and apparel for us that then get on a boat or a plane and get to where they need to be. I was less focused on that part and more focused on like moving product from point A to point B. And then from a planning perspective, I've had a couple roles in planning that were really centered around in planning. We're trying to forecast out how much demand there is for product, for Nike product in the marketplace for like we work in seasons. So there's 4 seasons at Nike, spring, summer, fall, and holiday. And each one of those would have different products or similar products. And there might be different colors for each season, depending on what seasonal trends are in relation to the color palette. But from a planning perspective, we try to forecast, basically how much footwear and apparel, hats, bags, socks will go into the marketplace, and make sure that we're balancing that with inventory to make sure we don't have too much inventory, but we have enough to maximize our sales. And then when you like Nike has multiple kind of little businesses inside of the overall Nike Inc. group. And so it all depends on what area you're in. So I've spent some time planning in goal planning in the Jordan business. And then right now I'm currently leading the team that plans all the kids product and accessories. So accessories are hats, bags, and socks. So kids product and accessories in the North American geography, so US and Canada. And so, there's different lenses that we have in different roles at Nike, but from a functional perspective, I've mostly been in supply chain and planning for the last little bit of my career.
Yeah, that's interesting that it's really varied throughout the years, that how you were saying about you worked on the Jordan brand, now you're doing more so kids shoes, apparels, etc. Sticking to that Jordan brand now, so I'm aware you did that for a little bit. How cool was that? I mean, we're getting to work on shoes for Michael Jordan. I mean, when you put it into perspective, it's really cool, I think. So, I mean, what did you think about that?
It was an amazing experience on like multiple levels because, like I said, I remember being in high school, and it was right when the Air Jordan 3s and the Air Jordan 4s came out, and to this day they're still my favorite Jordans. Although I wear a lot of AJ 1s as well now, but just at the time growing up, like those were the shoes that we all wanted. And I went to Neil McNeil, like I said, and it was a uniform school, and so we had to wear dress shoes. But all of us wore our sneakers to and from school, taking the TTC, and a lot of them were Jordans, and they were centered around what's the latest launch and what's the story behind the shoe, and that's the thing that drew me in. I think it was really the way we would get our information back in that day, obviously pre-internet, was really through Sports Illustrated and other magazines. And they would talk, Nike would obviously do some sort of PR, and the next Jordan would come out, and they would talk about the design behind the 3 and what inspired the 3. And a lot of shoe designs are inspired by cars. But then as Nike took over this kind of athlete signature process of creating product that are attached to specific athletes, the storytelling of the individual started to come to life on the product. And we would read about that in Sports Illustrated and not really know kind of all the other stuff that would go into it. And so moving into the Jordan brand and just seeing how we create product, and obviously it's different because the brand is still doing extremely well. And it's one of the few brands in the world that the person is still alive, that the brand is named after. And just having the experience of seeing how that product was created, and then also how you're honoring and respecting the stories that were told in the past, and how each of the precious shoes, whether they're OGs or not, really need to have a really strong story, and how our teams that worked on the product made those come to life was really interesting to see kind of all that happened. And it was less about, you know, you have this item that's a shoe, but you actually become more engrossed in the product and like the details of the product and why a certain thing is there. You know, it's that consumers really kind of love to see those little details. And I remember as a kid learning about those details, like I said, through those magazines. And so it was a really great experience. I really enjoyed it. It's always nice to know, you know, what's coming before people, the general public knows, because you know kind of what the stories are and stuff. And so that was kind of fun. And then it was just an overall great experience to work for that brand. And that was one of the coolest and fun jobs I had since I've been at Nike.
Finally, for the big question now. By the way, shout out to Jerry Gasman for connecting me with you. I wanted to give him a shout out as well, and he
Yeah.
kind of intrigued me when he said Kevin may have met Michael Jordan. A little tidbit, maybe you can ask him about it yourself. Have you gotten to meet Michael Jordan himself?
There's it depends on what you classify as meat. So
Okay.
I will give you two examples of how, like, one is really, I just ran into him. This is before I worked in the Jordan brand. So from my office, I was walking from my office to go get a coffee at the cafeteria one day, and off in the distance, I could see a very large man walking with somebody else. And as that person got closer and closer, I was like, oh my God, I think that's Michael Jordan. And sure enough, it was like 8 o'clock in the morning and there wasn't a lot of people around. And it was Michael and somebody else. He was visiting our campus for the day. And it was just the three of us. And I'm like, okay, like I've always been with, whether it's with athletes or famous people, is like, they're just people, right? So like, we just have to treat them like people. And so I've always been one that would be like, hey, how's it going? And I said, good morning, Michael. Hope you have a good day. And like, he just said, oh yeah, thanks. And you too, basically. And that was it. And I was like, oh my God, I just spoke to Michael Jordan. So whether you classify that as meeting, I don't know. But when I worked for the Jordan brand, there were sessions that he was in that I was in, and because he is still heavily involved in some of the product creation, because obviously he is the brand, and it's more on the newer stuff that comes out from a basketball perspective. And so I have been in meetings with Michael. I can't say I shook his hand, but I've been, you know, in close proximity to the man, and he definitely has a presence.
You know what? I classify both of those as meeting. I think we can say meeting. I mean, even the fact that you got to talk to him, I still think that's very cool, and not many people get to do that. So I mean, that's an extremely cool opportunity that
Yeah.
you got to meet him. So that's terrific. Kevin, thanks so much for doing this today. I really appreciate it, and you're definitely a person who has a very interesting story. That's for sure. I mean, working for Nike. And all the best in the future with the company.
Thank you, Elias. I appreciate it. And I was glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, me too. You know, hopefully if I ever get out to Portland one day, I'll come and meet you in person, and maybe you could give me a tour of the Nike facilities. I don't know.
We could definitely do that.
Sounds good. Take care, Kevin. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Keeping It Sporty podcast. Don't forget to listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or on our website at keepingitsporty.com. And make sure to follow us on Instagram at keepingitsporty. That's KEEPIN with no G, it sporty, SPORTY. I've been your host, Elias Drakos. So long, and see you next.